Picture Orchard Towers in Singapore. You think luxury, right? Maybe a high-end shopping spree or a fancy cocktail bar. But in 2002, that image was shattered when the place became notorious for a brutal double murder.
Yeah, it's a fascinating juxtaposition. You have this symbol of affluence and cosmopolitan life, and then hidden in plain sight, this incredibly violent crime unfolds.
It sounds like the setup for a gritty thriller. A Daewoo chairman, a luxury car parked on the 7th floor of the Orchard Towers car park, left there for days. It wasn't until a security guard, Mohammed Yaqub, noticed a disturbing smell that the nightmare began to surface.
The discovery was grim. Inside the car were two decomposing bodies. One, a man named Ko Nai Guan, was found crammed into a wicker basket. The other, his girlfriend, Lan Yaming, was in the trunk wrapped in plastic.
Let's delve into who these victims were. What led them to such a horrific end?
Well, Ko Nai Guan had a story marked by both success and hardship. He'd been a successful electronics businessman, but faced setbacks, leading him to become a driver. Ironically, he was employed by the man who would become the prime suspect in his murder. A shocking betrayal.
Hold on, his own employer was the suspect. This is getting more and more intriguing by the minute. Tell me about this employer.
His name is Michael McRae, a British expat living the high life in Singapore. He was a financial advisor, known for his charisma and his love for extravagant parties. But there were whispers of financial misconduct and a strained relationship with his wife back in Australia.
So not exactly a squeaky clean character. And to add to the complexity, McRae had a girlfriend.
Yes, Audrey Ong, a much younger Singaporean woman. They were known for their shared love of luxury and high living.
I see. So we have a love triangle, a brutal double murder, and this glamorous backdrop of Orchard Towers. It's like a powder keg of intrigue. Where do we go from here?
Well, to understand the sequence of events, we need to go back to New Year's Eve 2001. According to McRae, there was a party at his apartment. He claims Ko insulted Ong, sparking a fight between him and McRae, a fight that turned deadly.
So McRae's claiming self-defense. But given the nature of Ko's injuries, was it really?
That's the crux of it. Ko suffered fractured ribs, a broken throat, and severe bruising. The brutality of the attack raises serious questions about whether McRae's actions went beyond self-defense.
And what about Lan Yaming? How did she become a victim in all of this?
McRae claims that after the fight, he panicked. Lan was a witness, and he feared she would go to the police. He confessed to confining her in Ko's bedroom and eventually suffocating her.
It's a chilling turn of events. What happened next? Did McRae try to cover up the murders?
He did. With Ong's help, he attempted to dispose of the bodies and clean the apartment. They even tried using acid to dissolve the bodies, but that plan thankfully failed. Realizing the gravity of their actions, they decided to flee.
Where did they go?
McRae fled to his estranged wife in Australia, leaving behind their lavish life in Singapore.
So, they became international fugitives. Did they ever face justice?
They did, but the path to justice was long and complicated, particularly for McRae. Australia has strict laws against the death penalty. Singapore had to assure them that McRae wouldn't face execution, even if convicted of murder. This involved explaining the intricacies of Singapore's clemency process, where the president has the power to commute a death sentence to life imprisonment.
Wow, it sounds like Singapore had to jump through a lot of legal hoops to get McRae back.
They did, and McRae wasn't going down without a fight. He filed numerous appeals against his extradition, dragging the process out for over 3 years. It speaks to his desperation to avoid trial in Singapore.
What do you think his strategy was? Did he believe he could escape punishment altogether?
It's hard to say for sure. Maybe he thought he'd have a better chance at a lighter sentence in Australia, or was hoping the case would fade from the public eye with time.
And what about Audrey Ong? What was her fate?
She was extradited first and eventually faced trial in Singapore. She pled guilty to 2 charges of disposing of evidence and was sentenced to 12 years in prison.
12 years for helping to cover up a double murder. Some might consider that a lenient sentence.
Yes, there was some public debate about the perceived leniency of Ong's sentence. However, the focus shifted when McRae was finally extradited back to Singapore in 2005 under heavy guard. The case had gripped the nation, and the media was in a frenzy.
Can you imagine the pressure on the prosecution? They had to secure a conviction, but they had also made this promise to Australia about the death penalty. Did they manage to strike that delicate balance?
They did, but not without making some tough decisions, which ultimately sparked further controversy.
They had to secure a conviction, but they'd also made this promise to Australia about the death penalty. Did they manage to strike that delicate balance?
They did, but not without making some tough decisions, which ultimately sparked further controversy. The prosecution offered McRae a deal. They reduced the charges from murder to culpable homicide not amounting to murder. This took the death penalty off the table.
That must have been a difficult decision. What was McRae's response?
He took the deal and pled guilty to 2 counts of culpable homicide along with a third charge of causing evidence to disappear. His defense strategy shifted. Now, it was about portraying him as a man driven by a moment of rage, not a cold-blooded killer.
So, not denying his involvement, but trying to paint a more sympathetic picture for the court. Did that strategy work?
Well, his lawyer highlighted McRae's supposed remorse, his prior good relationship with Coe, and the fact that he attempted to revive Coe after the fight. They wanted to humanize him, to distance him from the image of a monster.
That's interesting. But if McRae was genuinely remorseful, why did he flee to Australia? That doesn't seem like the action of someone taking responsibility.
That's a valid point. And the prosecution hammered that home during the trial. They argued that the sheer brutality of Coe's death went far beyond any reasonable definition of self-defense. They reminded the court that Lan Yaming was an innocent victim, confined and ultimately killed simply because she witnessed the fight.
Powerful arguments on both sides. What was the verdict?
The judge, Justice Chu Han-tek, didn't buy the remorse angle. He sentenced McRae up to 24 years in prison. The maximum 10 years for each culpable homicide charge to be served consecutively, plus 4 years for disposing of evidence.
24 years is a significant sentence, but considering he took 2 lives, some might still see it as lenient, especially given the initial public outcry for the death penalty.
Absolutely. The public reaction to the sentence was explosive. Many felt it was far too light for the gravity of his crimes. Some even accused the government of caving to pressure from Australia. It was a deeply divisive issue.
I can only imagine the heartbreak and frustration for the victims' families. Their loved ones are gone, and the perpetrator, in their eyes, received a less than adequate sentence. It's a difficult pill to swallow.
You're right. And it brings up a critical aspect of this case that we haven't touched upon yet, the victims themselves. Ko Nai-Guan's family was devastated, their grief compounded by the betrayal they felt at the hands of his employer.
And what about Lan Yaming's family?
Lan Yaming remains a tragic figure in this story. We know very little about her motivations for coming to Singapore or the true nature of her relationship with Ko. Her family, thousands of miles away in China, were left to grapple with the news of her sudden violent death.
It's a stark reminder that behind the headlines and legal proceedings, there are real people whose lives have been irrevocably shattered by this crime. Their stories deserve to be remembered and honored.
Absolutely. Their stories add another layer of complexity to this case, reminding us that justice isn't just about punishing the guilty, it's also about acknowledging the profound and lasting impact of crime on the victims and their families.
So McRae's behind bars, but he wasn't content with the sentence right. He appealed.
He did. He claimed the sentence was too harsh. Specifically, he wanted the sentences for the 2 culpable homicide charges to run concurrently, which would have significantly reduced his time behind bars.
Wow, I didn't realize McRae actually appealed his sentence. That's surprising. What were the grounds for the appeal?
His lawyers argued that the judge didn't adequately consider mitigating factors such as McRae's remorse and his attempts to revive Kaur after the fight. They also argued that the consecutive sentences were excessive, given that the offenses arose from a single event.
That's a bold argument, especially considering the brutality of the crimes. Did the court buy it?
Not a chance. The Court of Appeal upheld the original sentence. They even pointed out that they could have increased the sentence based on the severity of his crimes. Justice delayed, but ultimately delivered in this case.
But the debate surrounding this case doesn't end there, does it? This whole ordeal really put a spotlight on Singapore's justice system and its relationship with international law, especially regarding the death penalty.
You're absolutely right. Australia's firm stance against capital punishment forced Singapore into a difficult position. They had to make assurances that McRae wouldn't be hanged even if convicted of murder, which involved explaining the nuances of Singapore's clemency process and the role of the president in commuting sentences.
This case wasn't just about 2 murders. It became a lightning rod for anxieties about foreign influence in Singapore. The image of a wealthy expat seemingly escaping justice fueled public anger. Did this case lead to any changes in Singapore's legal system or extradition policies?
It's difficult to draw a direct causal link. However, this case certainly highlighted the complexities of dealing with countries that have different legal systems and values, particularly regarding the death penalty. It also underlined the need for clear and consistent extradition procedures to ensure that justice is served regardless of nationality or political pressure.
So the Orchard Towers murders were a significant turning point, forcing Singapore to grapple with difficult questions about justice, sovereignty, and its place on the global stage.
Exactly, and it ignited public discourse on a number of issues, including the role of wealth and privilege in the justice system, the treatment of foreigners in Singaporean society, and the effectiveness of its legal framework in deterring crime.
The McRae case wasn't just about two murders. It became a mirror reflecting some of the deeper tensions and anxieties within Singaporean society.
You've hit the nail on the head. And those tensions were further amplified by the media coverage, which was relentless.
The media had a field day with this case. Orchard Towers, a British expat, a double murder. It was sensational. How do you think that level of media attention influenced the case?
Oh, the media coverage was intense, both locally and internationally. Newspapers ran daily updates, television specials dissected every angle, and online forums buzzed with speculation. It undoubtedly played a role in shaping public perception. The media often highlighted the more sensational aspects, the brutality, McRae's lavish lifestyle, the international manhunt.
Yeah,
This created a climate of fear and outrage, which might have contributed to the public's dissatisfaction with the eventual sentence.
that's interesting. But I'm not sure I agree that the media was entirely to blame for the public anger. Didn't the prosecution's decision to reduce the charges also play a role?
You raise a valid point. The decision to reduce the charges from murder to culpable homicide, while strategically necessary to secure McRae's extradition and a conviction, did fuel a perception that he was getting off lightly. This perceived leniency, coupled with the media's portrayal of McRae as a privileged expat who thought he was above the law, intensified public resentment.
It also makes you think about the victims and their families. They were thrust into this media storm, their grief and loss compounded by the constant scrutiny. Did the media provide a balanced and sensitive portrayal of their experience?
That's a crucial question. While the media did report on the family's grief and calls for justice, the focus often shifted back to McRae and the legal proceedings. The victims' stories, their lives beyond the context of this crime, were sometimes overshadowed by the more sensational aspects of the case.
It highlights the ethical tightrope that journalists have to walk when covering high-profile cases. Balancing the public's right to know with the need to protect the privacy and dignity of those involved, particularly the victims' families, is a delicate act.
Absolutely. And this case sparked a lot of debate about the media's responsibility in such situations. Were they exploiting the tragedy for ratings and readership? Did their coverage contribute to a trial by media, potentially influencing the outcome of the legal proceedings?
These are important questions to consider, not just in the context of this case, but in any situation where the media intersects with the justice system. It reminds us to be critical consumers of information, to look beyond the headlines, and to consider the human impact of these stories.
This case also exposed deeper anxieties within Singaporean society, anxieties that extended beyond the crime itself. It challenged Singapore's carefully cultivated image as a haven of stability and order. Here was a brutal double murder involving a foreigner occurring in the heart of one of its most affluent districts.
This case really highlights a tension at the heart of international law. How do you balance a nation's right to punish crimes committed on its soil with another nation's moral stance against certain punishments?
Precisely. And the lengthy extradition process, the negotiations with Australia over the death penalty, all of that played out on the world stage, raising questions about Singapore's sovereignty and its approach to criminal justice. The image of a wealthy expat seemingly escaping justice fueled public anger and tapped into existing anxieties about foreign influence in Singapore.
So a case that started with a fight in a luxury apartment had ripple effects that extended far beyond Singapore's borders.
It became a focal point for discussions about social inequality, cultural differences, and the perception of foreigners in Singaporean society. It forced people to confront uncomfortable questions about privilege, justice, and the rule of law.
And those conversations continue to resonate today, don't they? The Orchard Towers murders weren't just a shocking crime, they became a catalyst for broader societal introspection.
Yes, the case serves as a stark reminder that beneath the veneer of prosperity and order, deep-seated tensions and anxieties can exist. It exposed the fragility of social harmony and the complexities of navigating a globalized world where different cultural values and legal systems collide.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the facts of the case, the legal battles, the media frenzy, and the broader societal impact.
We've seen how a seemingly ordinary argument can escalate into unimaginable tragedy. We've witnessed the challenges of navigating international legal systems and the complexities of defining justice, and we've glimpsed the dark undercurrents that can flow beneath the surface of even the most seemingly ordered societies.
It's been a fascinating, albeit disturbing, journey. This case, with all its twists and turns, moral gray areas, and its enduring legacy, invites us to think critically, to question assumptions, and to engage in thoughtful dialogue about justice, accountability, and the human condition.
The Orchard Towers murders continue to hold a unique place in Singapore's collective memory. The case serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us that even in the most seemingly utopian societies, darkness can lurk in unexpected places, and that the quest for justice is often a long and winding road.
It's a case that leaves us with more questions than answers. A reminder that sometimes the most valuable lessons come from grappling with ambiguity and acknowledging that there isn't always a neat and tidy resolution. What do you think is the most enduring legacy of this case?
I think the most enduring legacy is how this case continues to provoke discussion and debate even today. It challenges us to consider the complexities of crime and punishment, the role of the media in shaping public perception, and the ongoing tensions between individual rights and societal expectations.
We'd like to leave you with a final thought. As you reflect on the Orchard Towers double murders, consider this. How do you think Singaporean society has changed since this case? Did it lead to any significant shifts in attitudes towards foreigners, crime, or justice? It's something worth pondering as we navigate an increasingly complex and interconnected world. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.